Chuck Wendig, Chuck Wendig, Chuck Wendig, Chuck Wendig, Chuck Wendig, Chuck Wendig. Oh! Welcome to Two Professional Writers. I'm Henry. This is Gus.
And we're here today to take on renowned bacon narwhal boy Chuck Wendig's writing advice, because we saw a few people, we mentioned him in the last video, we saw a few people in the comments who were interested in that being a video, so we figured why not hop on it now.
So anyone who doesn't know the premise of this show, we largely just critique advice. For the most part, writing advice, sometimes also life advice with a certain eccentric Canadian professor. And today we thought we're going to go to something that is very firmly within the writing and very firmly within my wheelhouse, because it is Chuck Wendig's 25 Things You Should Know About Writing Horror.
Man, what is it with, like, numbered lists, you know?
Yeah, anytime there are numbers, it's gonna be rough. So, full disclosure, because after all, as you know, Two Professional Writers is the fairest show on the internet. And we're all about good faith here.
Well, we're entirely good faith if you disagree with the person that we are critiquing. If you agree with the person we're critiquing, then of course we must be in the uttermost bad faith.
Oh yes, of course. We're being paid by big anti-Wendig.
Last episode, Bezos paid us to do an inside job just so that his, writing advice would just be more proliferated, because he needs us to market him negatively.
Yeah, absolutely. We really gave Bezos the exposure he needs. Anyway, so, valuable context. This advice was posted on Chuck Wendig's blog, Terrible Minds. That's a funny...
Yeah. So this was... What year was this? Because this seems like this has been a long time coming.
October 11th, 2011, and trust me, hearing some of this, you will know it was 2011. But the reason it's worth disclosing is, I'm not saying that the Chuck Wendig of today would necessarily stand by these rules or the ways that they were expressed. But yeah, we're not really here to critique Chuck Wendig, the person, while of course we have certain philosophical differences to him in his approach to things like copyright and his attacks on the Internet Archive, which is an incredibly valuable piece of online archaeology.
And just, the inability to do Twitter right, which is to not do it at all, or at least not to it to the extent that Chuck Wendig does.
Yeah, I deleted my Twitter. I'm the king. I'm the Chad.
Exactly.
So we're going to talk about his writing advice. And one more thing before we hop into it. If you are interested in some more good horror writing advice, because I'm sure, there'll be some nuggets in here, and Gus and I will dispense some of our opinions in it. I actually wrote a fun little horror story the other day, which is will be in the links below, which is a kind of horror meta story which also teaches you how to write a horror story. So if you're interested in hearing more of my opinions on what makes good horror as a guy who's pretty damn experienced in both consuming and creating it, hop down there, check out the link. If you love it, great. If you hate it, yeah, that's fine. I'm not here to mind control you.
Well, there you go. Check out the description, and you may learn a thing or two, and or be terrified.
Hell yeah. Alright, speaking of terrified, shall we begin?
Yes, absolutely. And for fans of other videos on this channel, this era of writing criticism is the same era as Echo Chamber, which we made a video about. So, just a bit of context for what we're stepping back into in this horrifying, rickety-ass minecart time machine.
Yep, 2011, a rough time intellectually. Speaking of, here is Chuck's little intro. Shall we see if it's as fun as the intro to the Bezos facts?
Oh boy, I love fun and epic things, dude. You know I do.
Yeah, you know this is going to be bacon. Anyway, I grew up on horror fiction. Used to eat it up with a spoon. These days, not so much. But I only suspect because the horror releases just aren't coming as fast and furious as they once did. Yeah, the thing is, there's an early thing to take issue with, but something that kind of comes up in this is that Chuck Wendig kind of seems like a bit of a fake horror fan.
Oh, you're gonna go straight there, are you?
I am. I'm gonna be a bit of a gatekeeping piece of shit.
Henry, I just want you to know that you're the first person to ever do that with horror, and you should be ashamed for introducing that to an otherwise completely non-toxic community.
There's never been any problems in horror. I mean, great things came out in 2011. Hostel 3 came out. The Human Centipede 2, full sequence, came out. Just really fantastic. The Thing remake.
Goose O' Milk was probably around that time, too.
Fetus Munchers 3.
Yeah!
A movie called Inbred. In all seriousness, there was some really good stuff to come out that year. You know, The Tunnel, Kill List, Cabin in the Woods. But so, continuing from there, he goes on, but really, the novels I have coming out so far are all, in their own way, horror novels. Double Dead takes place in a zombie-fucked America, with its protagonist being a genuinely monstrous vampire. Oh, I do not miss the zombie craze, man. I do not fucking miss it.
Man, I also like the phrase zombie-fucked.
Yeah.
Like, that is the most, like, yeah, just throw two words together and you kind of get it.
I mean, 2011, like, to sort of 2014, that was the era of, like, cringeworthy compound swears. Like, oh, you fuxicle. You ball cheeser. What the fuck was that? Ball cheeser.
Yeah, this is like, there's going to be just such a weird dialect to all of this. At a certain point, we're going to become numb to the vocabulary being expressed here.
Blackbirds and Mockingbird feature a girl who can touch you and see how and when you're going to die, and then presents her with very few ways to do anything about it, which, by the way, is just the plot of... The plot of the very successful Stephen King novel, The Dead Zone, also adapted into a successful horror movie by another horror legend, David Cronenberg, and starring Christopher Walken.
Yes, okay, this has nothing to do with, that's all very informative, but the way that sentence is worded is it's like, this is a horror story about a girl who can touch you, and like a bunch of people were just like, oh, no,
that might be quite scary to Chuck Wendig. Sorry, that was really mean. That was really mean, I'm sorry. Because you know Chuck's watching this, because he Googles his own name. Alright.
Oh, man.
But yeah, it's just, the reason I bring that up is not just to, like, flex horror knowledge. It's this thing of, like, again, it shows kind of a lack of awareness of, like, the genre greats. Because it'd be like, oh, you know, I've written my own horror novels. I have this really cool one about this alcoholic writer who goes to this hotel in the mountains with his family, and he starts to think about killing them.
Yeah, I have this, like, interesting short story. It's a little bit, it's more of, like, a poem, really, but, like, this dude is, like, he's really sad that, like, his wife's gone, and then this bird comes in. I'm calling it the macaw.
Oh, the macaw. I like that.
Yeah, the macaw comes in, and it goes, not anymore, bro.
Yeah, never again,
Ain't happening. Buddy. No, not this time, not never. It's over, bro.
God damn it. Alright, yeah. So...
And then he starts rapping.
Sold! 8 seasons. Anyway, both are occasionally grisly, and each puts to task a certain existential fear that horror does particularly well, asking, who the hell are we, exactly? And so it feels like a good time, with Halloween approaching, with Double Dead in November, and me writing Mockingbird at present, to visit the subject of writing horror. None of this is meant to be hard and firm in terms of providing answers and advice. These are things I think about writing horror. Good or bad, right or wrong. Peruse it, add your own thoughts to the horror heap, and as always, enjoy. I'll give him that. That's a reasonable approach to have, to be honest.
Well, I mean, we haven't even gotten into the actual rules yet, so all of this is preface for us to be free to disagree or agree with whatever comes up, so at least he's opened the door that way.
Oh yeah, alright, so tip number 1. At the heart of every tale, a squirming knot of worms. You're getting Jordan Peterson flashbacks.
Wait, that's the whole tip?
No, there is subheadings to each one. I just thought I'd let you kind of mull that one over. Alright, so are you ready?
Okay.
Every story is, in its tiny way, a horror story. Horror is about fear and tragedy, and whether or not one is capable of overcoming those things. It's not all about severed heads or blood glutton vampires. It's an existential thing, a tragic thing, and somewhere in every story this dark heart beats. You feel horror when John McClane sees he's got to cross over a floor of broken glass in his bare feet. We feel the fear of Harry and Sally, of fear that they're going to ruin what they have by getting too close or by not getting too close. A fear that's multiplied by knowing you're growing older and have nobody to love you. In the Snooki book, this fucking dates it, we experience revulsion as we see Snooki bed countless bodybuilders and gym sluts. Her alien syphilis fast degrading their bodies until soon she can use their marrowless bones as straws with which to slurp up her latest Windex-coloured drink, and then in asterisks, insert Hannibal Lecter noise here.
Wait a second, is it legit? This is a horror story about a girl who can touch you?
I mean, that's the thing, like, for a start, I'm going to bring out an old classic, dust it off. not writing advice. Like, if someone's like, oh, awesome, I need advice on better writing horror, let's ask Daddy Chuck what he thinks. Okay, rule number 1, Die Hard, When Harry Met Sally, and Snooky. All horror. Thanks.
Well, in order to get started writing your story, you have to remember that all stories are fundamentally the exact same story.
Terrible advice.
Everything in every single story is universally the same across the board. So just look for how other stories be stories, and then do that in your story. And that's how you'll have a story. Like, this is
that's Jeff shit. Jeff Bezos is back.
Yeah, except Jeff Bezos had, like, the benefit of, like, brevity.
Yeah, it's true. At least he wasn't long-winded. Again, here's a little bit of writing advice for you. Pop culture references about reality stars will always seem stupid and dated later on, as they do here. Also, gym sluts. Stay classy, Chuck.
Yeah, of all things, too, it's just, like, the Jersey Shore being the target is the most cliche thing ever, and it's like, whatever, just let this lady live her life.
Yeah, like, who gives it? No one's forcing you to watch it. Who gives a fuck? Alright, so, we've patently discovered that was not at all useful advice, and it wasn't funny or interesting either. Rule 2. Sing the ululating goat song. This would be a long fucking night, dude.
Oh my god. Yeah, well, I do that every night before I go to bed.
Jordan Peterson, was less opaque than this. Yeah. Horror is best when it's about tragedy in its truest and most theatrical form. Tragedy is born through character flaws, through bad choices, through grave missteps. When the girl in the horror movie goes to investigate the creepy noise rather than turn and flee like a motherfucker, that's a micro moment of tragedy. We know that's a bad goddamn decision, and yet she does it. It is her downfall, possibly literally, as the slasher tosses her down an elevator shaft, where she's then impaled on a bunch of fixed spear points or something. Side note, the original translation of tragedy is goat song, so whenever you're writing horror, just say, I'm writing another goat song, mother, and the person will be like, I'm not your mother, it's me, Steve, and you just bleat and scream. This fucking reads like Zach tweets. Like, this is the pinnacle of lol so random bullshit humor.
I like bacon. Bacon goes in my nose. Bacon, it goes in noses. Like,
Terrible.
That's what this is. You know what this is, too?
Go on.
Like, can I summarize this tip real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
This tip is, I know the real meaning of tragedy. I got 100% on the vocab. Also, I'm going to tell you this unrelated, like, story about a thing that could happen in a story. I'm just going to summarize it and say, do things like that.
Yeah, so a couple things to tear into this. Number 1, bad writing advice. Because he's essentially saying, it's good writing to just have your characters make terrible decisions. Like, I think I speak for every horror fan here in saying, like, literally nothing can take you out of the moment. Even if it's a genuinely really great piece of art. Like the movie I was watching earlier today, Spiral. There are parts in it when a main character makes these kind of dumb stock horror movie decisions, and it takes you out of the moment. Because you don't feel like, oh, what a tragedy that he walked into this obviously sinister house. You're like, well, I wouldn't do that, so I don't need to feel scared, because that wouldn't be me in this situation. You know? It creates a disconnect.
Yeah, and for me, even though horror is not my, like, genre of choice, I think I speak for every YouTuber when I say, people generally don't like it when characters make, like, illogical decisions just 'cause. You need to build that into their, like, personality and give them good reasons to think that, like, based on all the information they have, that this is the right thing to do. If they're just doing it just because, well, it would certainly suck for them if they made a misstep here or they made a stinky boo-boo, like, that's not good storytelling. That's just contriving conflict.
Absolutely, and again, I know I may get raked over the coals for my gatekeeping here, but gotta bear in mind, so far, this, like, so-called horror fan, the 4 examples he's cited are Die Hard, When Harry Met Sally, Snooky from Jersey Shore, and this kind of cliché fake slasher scenario he's come up with. Do you see what I mean now, in the sense that he doesn't exactly seem well-read in the genre he's trying to preach to people on right now?
Well, who knows? Maybe the next one will actually start getting into, like, specific examples about horror and what to do, rather than just conflict exists and sometimes things happen.
I'm so glad you said that, because rule number 3 is horror has been in our hearts for a long time. And the thing underneath is, From Beowulf to Nathaniel Hawthorne, from Greek myth to Horace Walpole, horror's been around for a long, long time. Everything's all crushed bodies and extracted tongues and doom and devils and demigods. Demigods isn't a horror thing. Anyway, this is our literary legacy. The flower bed of our fiction is seeded with these kernels of horror and watered with gallons of blood and a sprinkling of tears. Horror is part of our narrative makeup. This is like the filler in this fucking thing.
Oh my god, with just replacing horror in that one sentence about like bodies, you could insert any like word here and people would be like, yeah, things are the same.
It's like, Chuck, if you didn't have 25 things to say, you didn't have to make a 25-point list, you know?
Oh my god.
Like, it's the reason when Gus and I, we made our second video in the Two Professional Writer series, it's why we did 50 rules rather than 100, because we were sitting there and we tried to come up with 100 at first, and we were like, some of these were really phoning it in. It's better to, like, half it and just have it be all killer, no filler, rather than this tosh, which, realistically, if you're an aspiring writer, and, like, you know, this is, it's really cool to name a bunch of stuff and tell people you know about Beowulf and Nathaniel Hawthorne and Horace Walpole and all that shit, but, like, when a writer sits down in front of the blank page and has to actually tap out a decent first draft and then edit it into a better second draft, this is just fundamentally unhelpful. It's a useless, stupid thought that exists only to puff up your ego and make you sound cool with these, like, big, sweeping generalizations.
Yeah, this is like going into med school and the doctor being like, organs and blood have been a part of us for a very long time, and using knives and scalpels, we can take them out and replace them with other things. Many doctors have done this, from ancient Rome all the way to the modern day, and soon, you too, just by remembering that organs and blood and tools to extract them are in our, like, lexicon, you can do it. It's that easy.
Anyway, time for your first triple bypass.
Oh my god.
Okay. But yeah, it's so far we are 4 rules deep and we haven't gotten any advice. We've got genre exists, genre exists, genre exists. Alright, rule 4. Look to ghost stories and urban legends. You want to see the simplest heart of horror? You could do worse than by dissecting ghost stories and urban legends. 2 types of tale we tell, even as young deviants and miscreants. They contain many of the elements that make horror what it is. Subversion, admonition, fear of the unknown.
Okay. So once again, Chuck Wendig is like, horror is everywhere. It is omnipresent. It is all around you. It is like oxygen. There is so much horror that it all blends together, and none of it is distinct. Have fun writing a specific horror story.
Yeah, like, and again, I don't want to approach any of these rules in bad faith. Yes, I personally do think it's really useful to read other horror works and, like, dissect them. And see, okay, what works, what doesn't. What scares me? When something scares me, interrogate your feelings. Be like, what is it about the construction of this scare that made it get to me? And also, really importantly, because I would argue, no, not everything is horror, and you need to read outside of horror to be a well-rounded horror writer. But yeah, that's what it's all about. I think fundamentally, this, like, decent kind of surface-level advice is buried under all of this kind of worthless pretense and puffery.
Yeah, I mean, Henry, like, maybe Chuck Wendig is the greatest horror writer because he does clearly read outside of horror. He clearly does a lot of things outside of the horror genre.
Yeah, it seems he reads only outside of horror. He's gone to the other extreme.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like the horror he's seen is, like, all of those things he's already listed, most of which aren't horror, and then, like, Zombieland and, like, Scream 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Maybe Cabin in the Woods.
but not the scary movies. I mean, those are a little too scary. They've got it right in the title.
No, I mean, those would be terrifying.
Yeah.
So scary.
I heard Snooki's in one of them.
Yeah. Oh, again, it's like, there's that weird undercurrent of, like, misogyny to it as well.
Yeah.
Just, gross reality show women with her sex diseases. She's so promiscuous. Ugh. Not like our cool nerd girls.
When you really get down to it, all horror is really about girls who can touch you or girls who get touched.
I'm not unpacking that. Moving on to Rule 5. We're all afraid of the dark. This first sentence here makes me laugh because he has gotten it so fucking backwards. Are you ready?
Alright, let's do it.
We fear the unknown because we fear the dark.
Oh, is that why? Is that why?
Here's my little bit of writing advice. Proofread. And pay attention to your sentence structures, or you'll get a piece of unintentional comedy. That might be the only funny sentence in this, Chuck.
Yeah.
And I don't think you intended it.
Oh my god.
We fear the dark because we're biologically programmed to do so. At some point, we gain the awareness that outside of the light outside of the light of our fire lurks, well, who fucking knows? Saber-toothed tigers, serial killers, the Octomom. Just say you hate women, Chuck.
Really?
Just
the
say it.
Octomom. Oh my god.
Women in reality shows must die. Chuck Wendig, circa 2011.
A woman who will touch you? Oh no.
It's specifically women who have had sex
Yeah.
are the problem.
And like are proud of it. Like
Yeah, women who have had sex and have maybe like gone to reality shows because perhaps they needed the money. Like, if I had 8 fucking kids on the way, anyone who was willing to like give me money, I think I'd need it. You know?
okay,
Just on diapers alone.
time out. Are we fully convinced that Chuck Wendig, Joss Whedon, and Ernest Cline are different people?
Yeah, they are just a guy with like different fake beards and like glasses.
They say nobody can be everywhere at once, but like those 3 guys, like
Yeah, it's like one kind of like Count Olaf-esque figure is behind all of them.
see, here's the thing. I think one of them is our reality's version, but the other, like, timelines that the other 2 were from, they were so annoyed by them that they cast them into this reality. So now there's 3 of the same guy walking around.
What a tragedy. That's just like horror, like everything else.
Exactly. Everything's horrifying.
Horror often operates when it plays off the core notion that... horror often operates best when it plays off the core notion that the unknown is a far freakier quantity than the known. Weird sentence structure. The more we know, the less frightening it becomes. Lovecraft is like a really advanced version of this. Our sanity is the firelight, and beyond it lurks not saber-toothed tigers, but a whole giant squirming seething pantheon of madness, whose very existence is too much for mortal man's mind to pass. Again, yeah, a big fundamental of horror is that, like, fear of the unknown is a really valuable thing, and often what you don't know can be the scariest because when it's well written, your imagination fills in the gaps with what's personally scariest to you. But the issue I take with this advice is just... I just hate the execution. Because it so obscures what he's actually trying to say that you need to mine all of these, like, dense, self-indulgent paragraphs for, like, a nugget of quite vague advice.
Yeah, because all of these so far have just been... Here is, like, a thing that has existed as a cornerstone of this genre, and very little else. Like, you need to reverse engineer how he got to talking about this thing in order to know why he's saying it and how it would apply to your own writing.
Exactly, and that's the problem. It's really if you know what you're doing, it's useless because you already know it. If you don't know what you're doing, it might sound smart, because, you know, he's using this very kind of, like, verbose, purple way of talking about it, but you probably won't glean useful, practical information about writing good horror from it. Same as Bezos saying, like, oh, you know, good stories feature good antagonists. Well, how do you make one? Well, I don't know, just make a good one. Same as, like, oh, good horror features the unknown. Well, how do I employ that? Well, just fucking make it unknown.
Yeah, exactly. My god.
6. Plain stakes. I should clarify, that is S-T-A-K-E-S, stabbed hard through the breastbone. On the other hand, creating horror is easier and more effective when the stakes are so plain they're on the table for all to see. We must know what can be gained, and more importantly, what can be lost for horror to work. Fear is built off of understanding consequences. We can be afraid of the unknown of the dark. But horror works best when we know that the dark is worth fearing. I love that he went through, like, the first several rules just massively, like, generalizing and watering down horror. Then he takes this rule, which is just a fundamental of all narrative storytelling, and acts like, oh, this is a horror thing, specifically.
Yeah, well, the other thing too is that like this rule seems to directly like make the previous rules on this list like less valuable. Like I wouldn't say it doesn't make strong enough a statement to refute previous points, but none of the other ones did too. So everything just kind of remains vague and non-committal and like gesturing at like some universal idea of a horror genre and of storytelling.
Yeah, exactly. I think ultimately, so far, these tips feel like they have existed more to bolster the ego of the teller than be anything really truly practically intended for someone who isn't Chuck Wendig.
He says so little, like less than Jordan Peterson even, that like it's hard to really like know what the meat of this list is supposed to be.
Yeah, and to be honest, reading these, they just have such massive, like, high schooler, like, bullshitting a book report for a book they haven't read,
so
but have
fucking
maybe
right.
seen the crib notes on.
You're so right. Oh my god.
7. Dread and revulsion in an endless tango. Alright, this fucking sentence is just a nightmare. Are you ready?
Uh-huh.
Beneath plot and beneath story is a greasy, grimy, subtextual layer of pacing, the tension and recoil of dread and revulsion. That genuinely means nothing, Chuck.
Yeah! It's supposed to evoke some kind of feeling, I guess?
Beneath plot and beneath story is a greasy, grimy, subtextual layer of pacing? What the These are just words! You're just saying things, dude!
Also, pacing is not subtext. It's a quantifiable, like, measurement of, like... Well, like, it's...
A subtextual layer of pacing.
There's a quantifiable element, which is, like, the time spent on different things, but then there's, like you, like, deciding, like, interpreting, like, oh, well, there could have been more time given to this, more time given to that, but none of that is subtext. Like, the pacing is not subtext, because pacing isn't an idea that can be explored, like, thematically through, like, character analysis.
I'll tell you how I know. It's because pacing and subtext are two different words. If they were the same thing, we'd only need one word for it.
Yeah.
Anyway, dread is a kind of septic fear, a grim certainty that bad things are coming. Revulsion occurs when we see how these bad things unfold. We know that the monster is coming, and at some point we must see the wretchedness of the beast laid bare. Dread, revulsion, dread, revulsion. Or, for me to phrase it in a not, like, bullshit, stupid, pretentious way, planting and payoff. Suggest things so anticipation can build, and then pay off in the anticipation. Boom, there it is.
So, well, I don't know about you, but I think that he's onto something here, because dread and revulsion, you know, if all things are horror, dread and revulsion are really the only two emotions. You know, we feel dread when we think about the idea of, like, being around women, and we feel revulsion
when we think of Snooki or Octomom.
yeah, exactly. So it's you know, it's a constant dance of, and it all has to do with just how weird and uncomfortable Chuck Wendig and all people really are around women, even women.
I feel dread when I see a Chuck Wendig tip coming, and I feel revulsion when I'm reading it. Alright. Alright, so 8. Stab the gut, spear the heart, sever the head. Horror works on 3 levels: mind, heart, gut. Our mind reels at trying to dissect horror, and good horror asks troubling questions. Our heart feels a surge of emotion, terror and fear and suspense, all felt deep in the ventricles, like a wedge of rancid fat clogging our aorta. Our gut feels all the leftover baser emotions, the bowel churn. My favourite emotion, the bowel churn. The stomach turn, the saline rush of icy sepsis, as if our intestinal contents have turned to some kind of wretched fecal slushy. I don't think you're reading horror, Chuck. I think you're just, like, playing the brown note.
This is not...
Just
this one is
it.
so not writing advice. This is like reaction advice or like reaction analysis. Like, can you imagine if a fucking chef was trying to explain how to cook and he was like, food gives us nutrients as it enters our body, goes through the stomach, into the intestines, and spreads its nutrients throughout. Some of the food becomes waste and exits through the anus.
It's simple, lads. You need to give them the tasty, the crunchy, and the healthy. That's all you need to know about cooking. But yeah, just again, like, yes, yeah, engage different types of horror. Be intellectual. Ask interesting thematic questions. Yeah, you can have disgust in there if you want, but, like, you don't need to. Granted, fair play to Chuck, he said, like, these rules aren't prescriptive, but I also fundamentally think, like, it's also not useful.
Yeah, like, these are neither prescriptive nor descriptive. Like, they don't apply to what he's talking about. This is navel-gazing at, like, the idea of stories existing.
Yeah, this ultimately just feels like a very thin excuse for him to flex kind of, like, repulsive imagery. Oh, and by the way, that point ends with, turns to some kind of wretched fecal slushy, which he italicized, and then, which, for the record, is the name of my new satanic ska band. Again, that fucking dates this.
That's so funny, Chuck. This man's very funny.
Yeah, I mean, he may not be an expert on horror, but I'm sure anyone can concede that he is a truly side-splitting comedian.
I mean, it's a shame that all things are horror and nothing can be comedy, because if comedy existed, this would be it.
Anyway, 9. The Squick Factor. Something my father used to...
Sorry, go on.
The Squick Factor, hosted by Simon Cowell.
That is specifically like a TV tropes term.
Yeah, it's such tropes talk, isn't it?
Like I would hazard a guess that either like this, like the TV trope is in reference to Chuck Wendig saying this, or he's saying this in reference to TV tropes, or there's some example, to borrow other TV tropes parlance, that both of them are deriving the term squick from. But either way, it's just so 2010s.
Yeah, and we know that Chuck thinks When Harry Met Sally is high-octane nightmare fuel. Anyway, the Squick Factor. Something my father used to do. He'd walk up, hands cupped and closed as to hide something, and then he'd tell me to open my hands, the goal being that he would dump whatever he was hiding into my palm. Could be anything. Cicada skin, a frog or frog's egg, the still-beating heart of a unicorn.
Yeah, that happened.
You know he's one of those twats that bought that, like, unicorn meat, like, novelty gift that was never fucking funny.
No.
Anyway, the point was always the same. For me to find delight in being grossed out. Horror still plays on this, and why shouldn't it? It's both primal and fun. Side note, we should do a new gross-out reality show called The Squick Factor. You're fucking obsessed with reality shows. Anyway,
oh my
Hollywood,
god,
call
he
me.
actually went
You
there.
know my number from the last time we made love under the overpass.
Oh.
Actually, no, I'm not going to say that. Too mean.
I admire your restraint.
So this rule is, you can use gross stuff. Thanks, Chuck.
Yeah.
Alright, episode 10 is, that said, you do not actually require buckets of overflowing viscera. The Squick Factor is not actually a prerequisite for good horror. Then why is it on this list?
Oh my god!
Anyway, some of the best and most insidious horror is devoid of any grossness at all. A great ghost story, for instance, is often without any blood and guts. I just love that, like, Chuck is like Lily Orchard in the sense there's, like, next rule. Disregard the previous rule.
No, but here's the thing. This is worse than Lily Orchard, because at least she stood by a bunch of the takes. But with this is like, the moment he even approaches saying something, he, like, does, like, a tepid, like, walk back of it. So he's arrived once again at 0. Like, no ground was covered.
No, exactly, because here's the thing. If you were actually, like, a parsimonious, meaning, you know, you keep to the basics, you only keep what needs to be in there, the comment about, but you don't necessarily need it to make a good horror story, would be in the rule about it. Not an entirely different rule, like, qualifying the previous rule. Again, just smacks of filler.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, tell us when using this might be effective. And, like, the other thing, it's like, tell us, like, when we should use, like, you know, an element like dread or something. Like, describe it a little more, how it can be used. Give us examples that aren't just, this author existed. Do anything.
It's exactly like I was saying. This dude clearly doesn't know shit about horror. That's why he can't include any examples, and when he does, they're dunking on reality shows or talking about, like, movies that just aren't horror. Like, I genuinely just think he is writing something that he just doesn't have a fucking clue about.
Yeah, all I've learned from this list is that, like, The Jersey Shore is the most, like, horror anthology show of all time.
He keeps saying, oh, you know, read around, read different things. Have you noticed he hasn't listed a single classic ghost story?
Yeah, goddamn.
Telling. 11. Characters you love making choices you hate. Suspense and tension are key components to the horror-making process. I've long thought that the best way to create these things is to have characters you love making choices you hate. When you see this is rule 2. When you see a beloved character about to step toward the closet where the unseen serial killer is hiding, your sphincter tightens so hard it could break someone's finger. We recoil at mistakes made by loved ones, and this is doubly true when these mistakes put their lives, souls, and sanities in danger. Again, it's just the second rule again.
Yep. It's just the second rule again, and also it is just like, just because it'll make the audience feel more like betrayed or hurt or tense, have the character make these decisions, not because there's any kind of underlying motivation for them to do so, but because fundamentally what's more important than the reasons is
just having it
there.
there.
It's just having it there. Like, the reasons, the character, that's just an excuse for you to project your, like, idea of a loved one onto this person who might die.
Yeah, it's just Jeff Bezos with betrayal again.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, important to remember, characters aren't actually your family, and generally, if they make enough stupid decisions or, like, decisions you hate, people will just stop loving them. They're under no obligation to like your characters.
The thing is, for me, this whole decisions you hate thing, I think that he's really getting it backwards, because, for me, what I really love in fiction sometimes is when a character makes a choice that, like, I completely understand why they're doing it, but, like, I feel sad that they did it.
And what sucks is, Chuck is writing whole paragraphs here, so he could have that layer of nuance, but just refuses it to be a shticky dickhead and just fill it with lame, like, 2011 humor and kind of awkward, overly verbose fluff.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, like, Lily Orchard at least had the excuse that she was working with a character limit. This is your fucking blog, Chuck. You could go as in-depth as you like.
No, yeah, for real.
Rule 12. Horror and humor are gym buddies. Horror and humor hanging out at the gym, snapping each other's asses with wet towels. Horror and humor both work to stimulate the same place in our gutty works. Fucking... You're not fucking Alex from Clockwork Orange, you twat. A place that defies explanation. Sometimes you don't know why you think this thing is funny or that thing is scary. They just are. It's hard to explain a horror story or a joke. You can't explain it. You can only tell it. God, is this Mr. Enter?
Okay, so this is where, like, any sane person would realize, like, if this was a lecture...
I shouldn't be taking advice from this man.
This is when people walk out of the room, because, like, this is like, alright, I'm going to teach you the fundamentals of storytelling. Draws a circle on the board, draws a question mark in the circle. We don't know the fundamentals of storytelling. No one's ever figured out what makes things good or bad. No one even knows how the pieces fit together. No one understands this.
All art is pulled together with strings, rubber bands, and bubblegum. Just shut the fuck up and shovel it down your throat.
The thing is, I hate, like, you know, like, continually bringing in other fields over the course of this, but this is like a mathematician just being like, here is 1 + 1 = 2. It does, and for the sake of argument, let's just continue from there.
Yeah.
Like...
Anyway, it continues. Sorry, go on.
No, please, I didn't realize there was more Chuck in this one rule.
I feel like I'm going to up Chuck. And both are told similarly. Both have a setup, ask a question, and respond with a punchline or twist. Not to be this fucking guy, but, like, I was the kind of person who used to think that was clever, but, like, fundamentally, again, that's all storytelling. An inciting incident happens, asks a question, and the rest of the story pays it off. Yes, you can apply that to jokes and to, like, suspense followed by, like, a scare, but you could also literally apply it to anything, to the narrative stakes leading up to a gunfight in an action movie, or the character dynamics and setup that leads to a romance or a divorce in a drama. Like, it's just so stupid and reductive that it's just not in any way functional.
It fascinates me, and I think it belies like a actual like lack of confidence on Chuck Wendig's part. When you look at like Jordan Peterson, who, though delusional and like a total nutter, will attempt to summarize like life itself and everything one must do in 24 rules. And they're all like these brief, pithy, tiny, like simplistic things. And meanwhile, Chuck, in order to like even like beget some advice that would lead you to filling page 1 of a short story, has to like he has to be like, you must understand yourself and the universe and your guts and like everything. Like,
yeah,
this is way too much for like writing 101. This is way too much, and it's also way too little. It's too much to say too little.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if that isn't Chuck Wendig to a fucking T right there. Anyway, but the reason you can find these two working sometimes in tandem is because they're ultimately kissing cousins. Never say that again, Chuck. Never say that again.
Why is this
yes,
so fucking
horror
like...
and humor works together, but that is not advice on how to employ it correctly. And if this list has taught you anything, that if you swing for humor and miss, what you get is utterly painful.
Why is like 2010's humor so like, why has it got such a blasé attitude about like horniness? Like, it always seems like oddly fucking sexual, but in like a really like perverse like, haha, you're uncomfortable, but you better be in on the joke.
Anyway, rule 13, sex and death also play well together. I'm not fucking kidding, that is actually the next rule.
We've just left storytelling behind completely, haven't we? We're now in just Chuck Wendig's like brain. Like, this is like say what you will about Jordan Peterson, but like the inner machinations of his mind are an enigma.
Yeah. It was like, I'm gonna lick the Chuck. I'm gonna date the Chuck. I'm gonna be the Chuck.
Like, we are like now fully immersed in the Chuck Wendig dreamscape, where like just concepts are being thrown around. Concepts that, again, are so far removed from, like, how you write a thing. This is, like, has big blank page for days energy.
It really does. Anyway, 2 more kissing cousins, sex and death. Chuck, I will pay you to
told him not to
kissing
say
cousins. I will give you money to stop using that fucking phrase, you weirdo. Shakespeare didn't call the orgasm the little death for nothing. Which, by the way, I believe is a French thing, le petit mort, that I think predated Shakespeare.
Yeah, but Shakespeare's the kind of one that you learn at, like, Ren fairs and fucking nerd shit and fucking being a stupid fucking ass nerd. I hate nerds so much. Henry, have I ever told you that I hate nerds?
Speaking of stupid fucking ass nerds, in parenthesis after that is I, on the other hand, refer to it as the donkey's piñata. Yeah, because you don't have it. Anyway, both the taboo subjects, both kept to the dark, and as we know, horror lives in the dark too. We all fear death, and so sex, procreative and seductive, feels like an antidote to that.
Move over, maps of meaning!
It just has that, like, you're so right with, like, the, like, Joss Whedon uncomfortable horniness of, like, trying to leave you alone for, like, 5 minutes to work this out with yourself, Chuck, and then we can continue to talk about horror writing advice.
Yeah, I mean, now we know why there were so many typos, because this was written with one hand.
Yeah, God, alright. Feels like an antidote to that, but then you also have the baggage where, then in all caps, OMG, sex kills, whether it's via a venereal disease, or he's preoccupied with venereal diseases.
He's really worried about the women that will touch him and give him, like, death. Like, what else is that story that he mentioned but, like, a dramatization of that exact thing happening? It makes you wonder where our horror stems from, you know? Like, why do the things that we write about resonate with us so much? Why are we so afraid of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, typically, a good piece of horror can talk about the fears of society. A bad piece of horror that is like still written sincerely can tell you a lot about the fears of the writer.
It's like a Troll 2.
Exactly. Just like that person just hates vegetarians.
Yeah.
Anyway, OMG sex kills, whether it's via a venereal disease or as part of the unwritten rules contained within a slasher film. In this way, in horror, sex and death are the Ouroboros, the snake biting its own tail, or maybe the double dildo biting its own tail. I hate you, Chuck.
No! Bonk!
Genuinely
Go to
hate
horny
you.
jail. The horny jail meme.
No, Fortnite.
The horny jail meme was not invented early enough for this.
No Lady Dimitrescu for you.
Also, I just want to say, the fact that he is, like, referring to unwritten rules of slasher things and he can't even write his own rules coherently, it's like, maybe you should have started with the ones that were unwritten and write them down.
But to be fair, that's because he's not seen slasher films. He's seen, at a push, Scream. And he thinks that, basically gives him the Cribs notes.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Alright, 14. Car crashes and 2 girls with 1 cup. Dude!
Okay.
You're so horny, Chuck.
This is not okay. This is starting to get really weird.
I feel oddly violated. Anyway, if you want to understand horror, you have to understand the impulse that drives us to click on a video that everybody tells us we don't want to see, or the urge to slow down at car crashes and gawk at blood on the highway. Speak for yourself,
That
buddy.
rubbernecking is something you shouldn't do. It just causes more harm.
Yeah, rubbernecking is just gross and bad. Anyway, that urge is part of what informs our need to write and read horror fiction. It's a baser impulse, but an important one. We deny it, but you ask me, it's universal. How does that rule help people?
This is just, sometimes you want to watch porn, but you're too busy writing a post on your blog, so you can't stop thinking about it. Oh fuck, I just wrote this whole tip. Oh well, I'll just move on to the next one.
This is with a mug and a t-shirt that says, like, I'd rather be watching scat porn and car crashes.
I'd rather be listening to Scatman's World. Da 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 ba da ba ba da 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 da.
And it's just, like, accented with, like, fart noise and vomiting. Oh, Lucifer Valentine, what are you doing here? 15. Oh, I fucking hate this one. The real horror story is what's happening to the horror genre. Horror is once again a difficult genre. It had a heyday in the 80s and 90s, evidenced by the fact that it had its very own shelf at most bookstores. That's no longer the case at Barnes & Noble, and Borders broke its leg in the woods and was eaten by hungry possums. I've heard that some self-published authors have pulled away from marketing their books as horror because they sell better when labelled as other genres. Wow, what a wonderfully encouraging thought to give aspiring writers in the space.
This is marketing advice and not actual advice for, like, making a story.
Yeah, which is something like... These feel like Chuck's "you're a huge turd" rules. Or, like, you're, like talking about, like, the, like, physical strength of, like, bow users or, like, breastplates.
Yeah, like, this is the completely outside of the fiction, like, don't post spoilers for your series on Twitter. Like...
Yeah. 16. Ripe for resurgence? ? That said, I wonder if it's not time for horror to rise again. A gore-caked phoenix screaming like a mad motherfucker. Don't call it a comeback when it never left the motherfucking room. That was me, not him. Yeah. The times we live in often dictate the type of entertainment we seek, and we're starting to slide once more into a very dark and scary corner of American life.
Oh my god.
2011!
I like how...
Oh, you sweet summer child.
So apart from Chuck Wendig's real name being Chicken Little, like, the implication of this is... It implies that everything that came before this actually described horror in any way, and it's like, now we can talk about horror making a comeback, when you've lost the plot, Chuck. This was about telling people how to make horror, not that there should be more horror. This should be the thing you put after you've done the 25 rules, like at the very end.
Yeah, this article is called 25 Thoughts on Writing Horror. This fundamentally isn't about writing horror. Horror may serve as a reflection of that, equal parts escapist and exploratory. Maybe it's time again to let monsters be monsters, giving a fictional face to the fiends we see all around us. Then again, maybe shit's just too fucked up. 2011.
Wait, okay. So I'm gonna put two and two together here, and so put like a face to the basically. So he's saying in one tip, have your loved ones in the story essentially as proxies and have them make terrible decisions, and have in another tip all of the monsters be like stand-ins for like people and concepts that you don't like in the real world. So basically his version of horror is just amplifying anxieties, like directly importing them from reality into the fictional world.
Yeah, I wrote this like dank new horror story. There's just 14 pages of Donald Trump fucking my mum.
And she chose, and she chose to do it, which is her making.
Yeah, that's
the
worst
decision.
part. It was consensual.
Yeah, exactly.
Mum, if you ever watch this, I am so sorry.
Oh my god.
Also, Dad, I'm so sorry. Anyway,
I'm gonna edit this out, but it would be so funny. It's like, leave a comment in the, like about Trump fucking Henry's mom.
No, don't edit that. I'll leave that in. That's fucking hilarious.
No, dude. Okay, fine. You signed up for it.
Oh yeah, I'm shameless. I will open the gates of hell and let the demons pour onto me.
You heard the man himself. Leave a comment down below about Donald Trump fucking Henry's mom, and make sure you censor the F word so that it can be in the comment section and won't automatically get deleted.
Yeah. Anyway, it's worth a shot though. I submit it's a good time to try writing horror. Well, I should fucking hope so, Chuck, or this was a very useless article. Anyway, 17. Horror writers tend to be very nice. I don't know what it is, but goddamn if horror writers aren't some of the nicest writers on the planet. I think it's because their fiction is like constantly lancing a boil, the poison is purged, and all that's left is smiles. I take personal pleasure in knowing that if Chuck ever watches this, and there's like a good like 60% chance, he may feel the need to revise that rule.
This is so fucking stupid because again, like going back to like this is like a chef in the middle of like the lesson on like how to cook a nice souffle or ratatouille.
Chefs are great.
Yeah, chefs are the biggest dick motherfuckers you've ever met. We just come out and the biggest problem in this profession is that our big swinging dicks sometimes knock ingredients off the counters. We got to be really conscious of the space we use because of our massive wieners and our massive testes.
What has he done to us?
Am I wrong? Yeah, but am I wrong, though?
No, you're right. You're fucking right. Let's move on. Alright. 18. Horror needs hope. Good is known by its proximity to evil. You don't know what a great burger tastes like until you've eaten a shitty one. You can't know great sex from awful sex until you've experienced both. Then in parenthesis, pro tip. The great sex is the one where you don't cry after and eat a whole container of cake frosting. Who hurt you, Chuck?
Yeah, also says you. If you have like the best sex of your life and then you cry and eat like cake after, that could be fucking fine.
That's an incredible night.
Yeah, that sounds like an awesome night. Crying, it's very therapeutic. Cake, just an awesome thing to do. And like you've already, used up the rest of your energy on sex. All that's left is a nice movie and maybe like a bottle of like white wine to go with that cake.
Yeah, maybe end the night with a horror movie like Die Hard or When Harry Met Sally.
Much like his horror advice, like that's just a vague gesture at like discerning good sexual experiences.
Yeah, anyway. And so it is that for horror to be horrific, I hate that sentence, it must also have hope. Unceasing and unflinching horror ceases to actually be horrific until we have its opposite present. That doesn't mean that hope needs to win out. Horror always asks the question of which will win the day. The eyes of hope or the jaws of hell. That's another thing where, yeah, fundamentally I actually agree with the advice there. I just don't like how he said it.
Yeah, the other thing too is that like eyes versus jaws, I think jaws usually win.
I mean, to be fair, I think eating the jaws really engages with the guts. What the fuck am I talking about?
Horror is all about anatomy, really. It's about bodies and them touching each other, and also how we have bodies and how our bodies touch our own bodies and other people's bodies and everything.
Touching me.
Touching
you.
Chuck Wendig sucks.
He's driven us mad. Oh, it's Lily Orchard all over again. This is a true sequel to the first video.
Dude, I don't know about you, but, like, while this has been going on, I've slowly been, like, cooking in this room that doesn't have air conditioning because I need, like, good quality sound in here. So at this point, I'm just, like, marinating in sweat. I have become, like, a horror creature, like, in the time that we've recorded this.
I've been drinking a cocktail this whole time. So if I've slowly gotten more like giggly or like slurry, that's why.
I mean, horror
Rule
is
19.
everywhere, and we've both found it in different places.
Yeah. Alright, so rule 19. We're on the final stretch now. Last like 6 rules.
Good.
Lessons learned. Horror stories can serve as modern day fables. It works to convey messages and lessons, rules about truth and consequence. If we're looking to say something, really say something, you've worse ways of doing so than by going down the horror fiction route. This next sentence fucking slays me. Great example of this is the underrated Drag Me to Hell by Sam Raimi, a grim parable about our present economic recession. I'm sorry, but like, you could not be a more basic bitch than thinking, what's a horror movie that had a good thematic point to make? Drag Me to Hell.
Yeah, also the whole, like, we've been over the whole underrated, overrated thing with just, like, if you feel the need to include it, you're probably doing so because it's over or underrated among your friends or immediate circle of peers.
Yeah, it's not a functional term. But that's the thing. Ultimately, it's like, if you were going to pick out horror that has a great social meaning, and yeah, don't get me wrong, we've had a really like awesome dawn of social horror recently, but to cut Chuck some slack, this was 2011. Everything George Romero ever made, dripping with fucking social satire, and Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, etc. are like household names. The Stepford Wives, Rosemary's Baby, fucking Carrie, like so many things that are these true staples of the genre. I mean, that's the thing. All good horror engages on a thematic level. Like, well, we hinted at The Shining earlier. Fundamentally, The Shining is, in its book form and to an extent in its like film adaptations as well, a book ultimately about like alcoholism and addiction and how kind of giving in to the darker parts of yourself will ultimately cause you to destroy the ones closest to you.
See, the thing is, what you're describing and what Chuck Wendig, like this advice so far, has completely failed to actually address is that storytelling at a certain point becomes about ideas and conveying them and relating it back to like something real. The way Chuck Wendig talks about storytelling is that it is a loose connection of like gut reactions we have. Like experiencing a story and like getting to like its end is no different from like tasting food or like feeling like a rush of pleasure.
Yeah, hence the constant sex comparisons.
This is like the least sophisticated way of thinking about things. It's just kind of baser, like monkey interfacing with art as if like I stick my hand in the fire and it burned me, and it's dressed up in the most like verbose, like overly
flowery,
yeah, like overly like
purple,
yeah, like this is
it's purple prose.
Exactly. It's utterly like I don't know how any of this stuff works. I just feel things.
Yeah, and the few times he's talked about like engaging with horror on a thematic level, it's just been buried under all like the shit and bile. Anyway, 20. The Stick of a Short Sharp Needle. Title of his sex tape. Alright, so sometimes sorry, go on, it's what he's turned me into. Yeah. We're in the endgame now. Alright. Sometimes horror needs to be really fucked up. It just can't do what it needs to do unless it's going to cut out one of your kidneys, bend you over a nightstand, where are you going with this, Chuck? And shove the kidney back up inside your nether burrow. Horror all but demands you don't pull your punches, but that kind of unceasing assault on one's own senses and sanity cannot be easily sustained for a novel-length or film-length project. Hence, short fiction and short films do well to deliver the sharp shock that horror may require.
But didn't he say earlier that, like, being super unflinching and not pulling your punches doesn't always work.
Yeah, like fundamentally what he's saying here is like to cut through the chuckness of it all. It's if you want to do something that's fucked up the whole way through, just make it short, and that'll be fine.
So he's saying something that's, like, fucked up and might make you a little bit nervous about it, and you're, like, kind of unsure about, you know, how you're supposed to interact with it. You gotta make it as brief and as hurried and frantic as possible so that you're just done with it, and then you can get to your crying and cake.
Yeah, like, I watched a movie called Found on Shudder yesterday. Spoilers for Found, skip ahead a couple minutes. And it wasn't a great movie, it was like super low budget, but I respect the fact that they tried, and it had some genuinely extremely disturbing imagery in it. And the very last shot of the film, which I found genuinely like haunting in its arrangement and just how fucking disgusting it is, it's the main character you've been following throughout it all, who is like 11 years old. It's him tied up in a bed with a ball gag, and on either side of him, just caked in blood, are the decapitated heads of both of his parents, scalped and with their eyes cut out.
Yeah, ooh, jeez, that's an image.
And looking at it is just like so viscerally, you're just like, ugh. It's one of those things that's like, that's fucked up, but I'll tell you what, regardless of the quality of the film, I'm gonna remember that image for a long time, you know? And the fact is, if you didn't spend a whole film with this kid before that happened, it wouldn't be nearly as disturbing as it was.
Gotcha. Yeah. I see what you're saying. So there's something to this. It's just the way that he conflates. You can't do this in a long form story with like the thing itself.
Exactly. Like you can be fucked up in anything you want. You just have to do it well.
Exactly.
Anyway, 21. We need new monsters. The old monsters, vampires, zombies, ghosts, werewolves, have their place. They mean something, but they may also be monsters for another time. Never be afraid to find new monsters. Horror in this way is a pit without a bottom. You will always discover new creatures writhing in the depths, reflecting the time in which they are born. Just go to a juggalo convocation or a tea party gathering. You'll see.
Oh my god. No, wait a minute. Because I was in complete agreement until that last fucking, like little dig he had to get in there at, juggalos.
Throwing juggalos under the bus.
The Tea Party, they're fucking stupid. I dislike them a lot. But why would you, with juggalos, why would you lump them in? You're just this is a subculture that is different. Much like the Jersey Shore, this just doesn't, go with my blue check sensibilities. Time to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And, the rest of the bathwater is the fucking Tea Party.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, all the juggalos I've ever met are, really cool people. And while I'm not really a fan of ICP's music, Shaggy Two Dope and Violent J seem like really cool people. And if you haven't seen them and you need a smile after all this Chuck Wendig bullshit, please go check out Snake Busters, which are these two little videos with Violent J and his furry daughter, Ruby Bruce Lee. And it's just the most wholesome, lovely thing.
It's great. For fans of Hell of a Boss, this is just literally RL, Blitzo, and Luna.
It's so true. It's so true. But anyway, yeah, 3 things I hate about this. The throwing juggalos under the bus, how much the Tea Party dates this, and, yeah, I don't disagree with the rule. But can we talk about the irony of this rule when he started this thing off with, I'm writing a novel about a zombie-fucked America where the main character is a monstrous vampire?
Yeah, what are your monsters, Chuck, other than, these classic ones, and then apparently women who have, wily touches that can inflict disease and things?
Her touches don't inflict disease. It's a thing of Stephen King's The Dead Zone, where the concept is touching a person, and essentially you see how they're gonna die.
Okay, gotcha.
But you can't stop it. But again, literally, it is a wholesale rip-off of The Dead Zone. And again, not to say that you can't use concepts again, because horror is all about the remix and the inspiration. And I mean, creativity is in general. Beg, borrow, and steal. Improve on things. Do great shit. But, don't act like you're doing a new thing when it's just, what if The Dead Zone, but girl?
Yeah, totally.
22. Never tell the audience they should be scared. Show, don't tell is a critical rule in all of storytelling, so critical that you should probably have it tattooed on your forehead backward so that every time you look in the mirror, there it is. But in horror, it's doubly important not to convey the fear that the audience is ideally supposed to feel. You can't tell someone to be scared, you just have to shove the reader outside the firelight and hope what you've hidden there in the shadows does the trick. You can lead a horse to horror, but you can't make him piss his horsey diapers when something leaps out of the depths to bite his face and plant eggs in his nose holes.
Show don't tell is a piece of advice that a lot of people misinterpret or misunderstand when it comes to writing. But this, without even getting into that, this is the most it just is, That's just a thing people say. It's just a rule. Just do it. Basically.
Yeah, no one ever says what that means to people.
This is just disregard everything else on the list and just make sure that by blind luck the audience is afraid because you've shown and not told, which are distinct categories I will not go into and describe, but they are mutually exclusive. If you're not doing one successfully, you're doing the other poorly, because that's the only way it works.
Can I give a piece of practical advice on what this should actually say to be a functional piece of horror writing advice?
Go ahead, man.
Don't describe things in your horror stories as terrifying, horrifying, that kind of thing. Just describe them in a terrifying, horrifying way. That's what that should be. It's essentially, don't load it in the same way that you wouldn't call a joke hilarious in something. You would just explain and, describe an absurd scenario that should evoke laughs in people. The same thing. Don't say, ooh, there was a really scary dude walking down the hallway towards me. Be like, no, this dude with, wide, bugging, twitchy eyes and a grin that exposed long, dirty teeth stretching from ear to ear. That's the kind of thing,
Yeah, details that are, pertinent to how the person's, senses would interact with something, rather than, implying emotional responses that you would hopefully be evoking through the other way.
Exactly. That is how you take that piece of shit and you make it a piece of advice that authors can actually follow.
Yes.
Boom. It's that simple. It's almost as if practical tips are better.
Yeah.
Anyway, rule 23. Break your flashlight. You write horror. You're trying to shine a light in dark corners. Keyword there is trying. The flashlight needs to be broken. A little too bright will burn the fear away. The beam must waver. The battery's half dead. The bulb on the verge of popping like a glass blister. It's what the light bulb finds is so unpleasant, you can't look at it for too long. Look too long, it'll burn out your sanity sensors. In this way, horror isn't always concerned with the how and the why, but most certainly concerned with the what. Number one, that's just the fear of the unknown shit again. And number two, you got so lost in this fucking flashlight metaphor that I feel like he's trying to sell me a fucking flashlight.
This is Chuck Wendig's, short story, The Flashlight. Yeah,
The Flashlight by Chuck Wendig. A piece of microfiction.
He's already given us this advice in two different ways. The fear of the unknown, and that you can't pull your punches, and that, you need to, scare people. All of this is, horror should scare people. That's why it's called horror.
Be visceral, don't be visceral. Explain, don't explain.
Boo!
I'm Chuck Wendig.
Yeah,
Sex joke, laugh now.
Sex joke. Humor.
He's truly the angel dust of writing advice.
I mean, at the end of the day, humor.
Had it right there. Alright, rule 24. Horror still needs... No, this is the fucking Jeff thing. Horror still needs all the things that make stories great. You can't just jam some scary shit into a book and be like, boom, done, game over, slow down, slick.
It has to be epic.
Yeah, come back to the story. You will still need all the things that make a story great. What are they, Chuck? Anyway, horror, really any genre, ain't shit unless you can commit to a page of a story filled with great characters, compelling ideas, strong rating, and a sensible plot. Hate that word choice. Don't just dump a bucket of blood on our heads and expect us to slurp it up. I just love that idea of Chuck being look, it's simple. You want to be a good horror writer, all you need to do is read Jeff Bezos' rules, take that in, then read my rules, and you got it.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's do my stuff with his framework.
Yeah, Jeff Bezos is the base game, I'm the DLC, that's how you write.
You know, that's the thing. I think that's what my new pilot Jeff Airlines was missing. It needed a little bit more. It needed more like sex jokes and like just lights going out.
Random side swings at women in reality shows.
Yeah, exactly. Like he has to betray women on reality shows.
But it's funny, you're meant to like him because women in reality shows are disgusting, sexually promiscuous monsters, right? But they're literally like aliens that will slurp your bones and kill you with their venereal diseases.
Yeah, it's great because there's this spectacle of like, you know, this public woman whose like bad choices are publicized, and people can extrapolate that and then project it onto all people who either do hold or are purported to hold that gender, and then they can form their worldview entirely from the media.
Hell yeah, that's writing, baby. Alright, final roll.
Boom!
25. Horror is personal. Horror needs to work on you, the author. You need to be troubled, a little unsettled by your own material. Write about what scares you. Doesn't matter what it is or how absurd. Hell, some people think being terrified of clowns is ridiculous, until you realise how many people find clowns spooky as fuck. Yeah, it's not like one of the most successful horror properties of all fucking time is about a scary clown.
Yeah, oh my god.
What a phenomenally stupid...
Of all the things he could have picked.
You know that, like, movie Yesterday, where that dude, like, bonks his head and wakes up in a world without the Beatles? Do you think that happened to Chuck, but, like, he woke up into a world where Stephen King never existed?
Dude, I could not wait for Chuck Wendig trying to, like, recreate all of Stephen King's oeuvre. In fact, like, he really could, because he's already started just ripping off Stephen King.
It's not the idea of, like, you just look at every Chuck Wendig book and they're just, like, just a Stephen King plot.
I guess this fixes a, like, hole in the lore of the world, because we were saying earlier, either Ernest Cline, Joss Whedon, or Chuck Wendig were from another dimension. I think we've narrowed it down that Chuck is one of the ones from a different timeline.
Yeah, where Stephen King, who literally is called by most the master of horror, seems to have gone over this guy's head.
Yeah, exactly. My goodness.
Like, a guy who has perhaps had more influence on art and culture than probably any other living writer.
You know what? I'm calling it right now. I think Ernest Cline is the one from our dimension. Like, he's the prime one, because consider...
we deserve it.
Well, no, because consider how many reference in Ready Player One would, like, lead nowhere if he was from a different timeline. Like, the fact that they all are traced back to things is, like, the perfect amount of evidence to know that, like, yep, this was the guy, and, like, Joss Whedon and Chuck Wendig were from different timelines.
You fucking cracked it, man. The unholy multidimensional trinity. Anyway, dig deep into your own dark places. Tear off the manhole cover and stare down into the unanswered abyss. Speak to your own experiences, your own fears and frights. Speak up your anxieties and let them tumble onto the page. Horror works best when horror is honest. The audience will feel that. The truth you bring to the genre will resonate, an eerie and unsettling echo that turns the mind upon itself. We're done.
Oh,
sweet, merciful Jesus, we're done.
You gotta dig deep into your dark places. You gotta tear off that manhole cover.
I feel like Chuck dig deep into my dark place, and now I'm gonna be fucking walking funny for a week.
Yeah, I feel like we got our dark places dug out, my friend. Like, this was...
Yeah, we're gonna be walking like cowboys.
This was harrowing.
Until the next video comes out.
Oh my god. Okay, the one thing I think I learned from this is that Chuck Wendig is just afraid of everything, and what he calls his horror stories are just the outlet he uses to express the vague anxiety he has about just life.
Yeah, and especially women in reality shows.
Those dang old women in those reality shows. They just keep getting those venereal diseases non-stop all day long.
Gym sluts.
Gym sluts.
Dude. Again, I want to specify interest of good taste, like... I'm sure we all said some stupid fucking shit in 2011. Don't get me wrong, I was in high school in 2011, but, like, yeah, we all said some stupid fucking shit in 2011, and I'm not pretending that, like, this, like, aligns with what Chuck would believe or find appropriate to say today.
Yeah.
But, like, taking on its own merits, this writing advice is still out there. It's still one of the things that comes up when you search horror writing advice on the internet, and thus I would say it's worth this analysis and this kind of like sacred cow slaying that really you shouldn't be listening to this shit.
Yeah, exactly. And like honestly, like, 10 years ago was a radically different place, and frankly, I think for like from like 2010 to 2012 maybe, people just like hit a like culture blind stupidity vortex that only ended when the Mayan calendar did and pulled us all back to our proper reality. And I think that's also where the timelines, mixed, and we got Chuck and Joss
the same
from the
universe.
alternate universes. Yeah, I think that's when they merged. But beyond that, it's just important to know that at the end of the day, we're here to critique the advice and the tips, and regardless of who is behind them, it is the substance of what is being said that is important to us. And in this case, the lack thereof.
Yeah, and because I want to end this on a positive note after all that Chuck bullshit, you actually want to read like good horror advice, get Stephen King's on writing. There's a really good book that I swear by called The Horror Writers Workshop, which has just like a wonderful compilation of different horror authors writing advice. Read horror, write horror, practice a lot, and if, in the course of this video you thought, oh, this Henry guy seems to know his shit somewhat, feel free to check out my fun little horror story that is also a guide to writing horror stories down in the comments. Like, yeah, at the end of the day, this show isn't about dwelling on bad writing advice, it's about evaluating it, like Gus said, and then finding and appreciating the good and encouraging people to keep fucking writing, because, baby, that's all there is at the end of the day.
So yeah, just to elaborate off of what Henry said, because I think he's really summed it up well, I want to double recommend Stephen King's On Writing, but also Zen in the Art of Writing by Ray Bradbury, both fantastic writing books that will just help you get ideas down on a page and finish things. It's so important that you finish work so you can move on to new projects and you can just gain that experience. Having a story from start to finish, way better than a brilliant story, a novel that takes years for you to even consider writing down.
Keep writing. Don't listen to what Chuck Wendig has to say.
Now, then, or in any timeline.
And Die Hard is not a fucking horror movie. Good night, everybody.
Merry Christmas!